Hi, welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Mark Graben. Our guest today is José Ferro. He is a senior advisor with the Lean Enterprise Institute, and he's also founder and president of the Lean Institute Brasil. So he founded the Lean Institute Brasil in 1999 to disseminate the principles and practices of lean thinking to Brazilian companies. He's helped catalyze a global movement to establish lean institutes in other countries, which ultimately grew into the Lean Global Network, officially chartered in 2007. In the late 80s, Jose was a visiting scholar in MIT's International Motor Vehicle Research Program, the group that introduced the term lean to describe Toyota's revolutionary management system. Jim Womack and Dan Jones and others who were involved in that program, of course. Jose received PhD and master's degrees in business administration and production engineering from the University of São Paulo in São Carlos. So, Jose, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing fine. Thank you for inviting me, Mark. It's a pleasure talking to you and the people that listen to your message.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad I was able to see you in person in September in Sao Paulo. Want to give thanks to the Lean Institute Brasil for inviting me to give a talk at the healthcare conference, and so it was great.
Yeah, that was
a good
was a
crowd.
pleasure. It was a pleasure having you, Mark, in the healthcare event. We're trying to influence healthcare in Brazil. It's a very vital sector for the society.
Yeah, so well, there's a lot of enthusiasm and participation with Lean in Brazil's healthcare sector. We'll come back and talk about that. We'll talk about more. Jose's new book, I'm going to hold up here. Thank you to LEI for sending me a copy. Daily Management to Execute Strategy, Solving Problems and Developing People Every Day, co-authored by Jose, and we'll talk more about the book, but it's available now, translated from the originally published in Portuguese, right?
Yes, right. And it's been translated to Spanish as well.
Well, it's going to help spread through the Lean Global Network, right?
Yeah, right.
In different languages. So we're going to talk about the book. We're going to talk about all sorts of things here today. But, Jose, I like to ask people, their lean origin story. I think maybe we heard a little bit of it in your bio, with the IMVP, but I'd love to hear in your words, like, how did you first get introduced to things Toyota related, even maybe before it was called Lean?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a discovery for me and of course for a bunch of other people. At that time in the 80s, I was an academic. I was doing, research on different areas. I had done a master's, and my master thesis was about the automobile sector in Brazil, in particular the auto parts industry. And that thesis became a book that was available in Portuguese, and some of the MIT researchers found that out and tried to engage me in the overall global research. At that time, I wasn't really into the auto industry. I was into other academic, issues. And then there was an opportunity to go to MIT to do my personal interest, my academic interest in some of the areas. At that time, I was pretty much involved in organizational culture. It was a new topic in the academic environment, so I found that very useful to everybody. And at the same time, I met Jim Womack, and Jim said, well, why don't you come here? Why don't you translate the materials you have and just be around with these guys here? And that was an exciting moment, Mark, because Jim was able to collect researchers from all over the globe, Japanese, Koreans, Europeans. And so that was an exciting moment. And, bit by bit, I was able to understand better about the auto industry, their perspective, And then gradually I was involved into the world. And then I really discovered Lean by accident, by actually going to the Gemba.
Good.
And of course, the numbers were showing up that Toyota had discovered a new approach, a new method with outstanding results. But I had, from an academic perspective, I have different ideas, a little bit naive about the auto industry. I was in love with some of the Swedish approaches. It was called the social technical approach. They're trying to make the work more humane, and so there were a lot of stuff there, and a lot of discussion about what was the Japanese model. And then gradually, I was able to be involved in the research, getting the data about Toyota, getting the data about everybody else, and really was a discovery. And my aha moment actually was interesting, Mark, came when I did visit a Honda plant, a motorcycle Honda plant in the middle of the Amazon jungle.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, because of policies, government policies, they were trying to industrialize the Amazon region, and there were some policies to facilitate imports. So Honda had a huge motorcycle plant in the Amazon jungle. And when I visited that, I saw some of the elements that Toyota had developed and had implemented, and really struck my attention. I said, how can you do that in the middle of the jungle with that kind of a labor?
Yeah.
So that was my discovery. So I joined the team when I really saw something that struck me as absolutely unique and different and remarkable, actually.
Yeah. And, I think in that search for, a more humane approach to manufacturing, leadership, workplaces, I mean, I think, that is found at least in the ideal with the Toyota production system and Lean, of not just having, customer focus, but employee focus hand in hand, right?
Yeah, Mark, I discovered that much later on. At that time, I felt that Lean was only an efficiency approach, just becoming more efficient. And the humanistic approach in the Toyota system, to me at that time, was basically quality circles, involving people, doing Kaizen, a very, very superficial understanding of what the Lean system is, especially the more leadership, human approaches, how central is knowledge creation, engaging all the people, connecting people with the purpose. So that came later on in my learning. In the beginning, and I found that socio-technical approach that was European, very fascinating in terms of the thinking, but extremely poor in terms of the performance. It took me a while to understand that some of the elements sound very positive from a human perspective, but at the same time not sustainable from a competitiveness perspective. You can't be successful with that kind of a performance.
So keeping the company in business and keeping the jobs there is ultimately beneficial to people, in addition to a workplace that's supposed to be safer and more engaging and easy. I think of the priorities that come back from Toyota, the ideal of easier, better, faster, cheaper is the order I've often heard it articulated as.
And it took me, Mark, many years of learning, researching, and experiencing, and trying to help companies to understand how critical the people development element is in the Toyota system, how fundamental that is, and the role of leadership. It took me, decades actually, to really understand that, to move from tools, efficiency tools, to a complete management system where knowledge, and capability development and leadership, engaging everybody, connecting everybody with the purpose of the company. It took me a while to understand that. So that's why one of the things I wrote in the book is exactly about that. There is a piece of it that deals with the tools, with the techniques, yes.
Yeah.
But there is a whole chapter about how to execute it, how to put in place, how to engage the people, how to lead this daily management process.
Yeah.
Is as fundamental. You can design the most magnificent boards with all the right KPIs, but if you don't engage the people, if you don't lead right, you're not successful.
Yeah. So I want to dig into the book. I'm curious, Jose, after your time working with Jim and the IMVP, did you come back to Brazil? Were you in academia in that time before starting the Institute in Brazil?
Yes, I was involved in academia, but because of the research I had written, Mark, some papers that became very influential in Brazil. Because in 1990, exactly the time that I was coming back to São Paulo, remember at that time, no internet, no cell phones, communication was a little harder.
Yeah.
I had written a paper about, among other things, design age. One of the metrics that the MIT program used was design age of the vehicles, how old they are, as a proxy for how modern an industry is. And at that time, I had written, and the design age of the Brazilian industry was extremely high. That means very old designs were being produced in Brazil. At that time, there was a market protection, no imports, and only three companies, actually, multinational companies, Ford, GM, Ford together with Volkswagen, GM, and Fiat were producing here. There were no Japanese, of course, no Koreans at that time, no French, no German companies producing cars. So that, except Volkswagen. So that was the reality. A protected market, stagnated over decades. Prices of the cars were very high, very low quality, high taxes. So that's why part of the reason prices were high taxes and high costs. And then at that time, in 1990, there was a new president, our first elected president after a long dictatorship period in Brazil, military dictatorship. And the president decided to open the market. Okay. And one of the arguments he used was exactly that, that the Brazilians were producing very ancient cars.
Ancient.
And then my research paper came with that. So I somehow brought some data to that discussion. So a new policy was set up, and I was able to help the government to set up a new policy to open the market and at the same time help the transition for the industry to become more competitive. So I helped the government set up a new policy. I helped some of the companies to set up new strategies for that. Not that I wanted to, I was a traditional academic. The less you're involved with the reality, the better you are. In some cases. Yeah. So I was involved in helping the transition of the auto industry to a more modern, more efficient, with lower costs, better quality, and hopefully the market would grow. And that happened. We had new investments, new companies coming, imports, forcing the prices to go down, the industry to become more efficient. So that was my work for a few years, in the 90s. In the 90s, that's what I was doing here, and also had an academic job.
Yeah.
So that was my work. trying to help the auto industry to become more successful for some time. But then that wasn't my mission. I never felt that's what I wanted to do. The auto industry is very important as from an economic perspective for unemployment. But my idea was to help the Brazilian industry in general and the Brazilian society to get better. The same thing that was happening in the auto industry happened in every sector in Brazil, including the one you mentioned, healthcare.
Yeah.
Lots of inefficiencies, not a society that wasn't driven towards efficiency. A very strong government influence in all the economic sectors. So I felt that the same transition that was going through the auto industry, I felt was needed in pretty much every other sector in Brazil.
Yeah.
So that's what I realized in the 90s. And then in the late 90s, when Jim Womack wrote Lean Thinking, I invited him to come. We had a translation to Portuguese. I even wrote a specific chapter for Lean Thinking in Portuguese. And then Jim said, I'm setting up a nonprofit in Cambridge to disseminate those ideas. We felt that the machine that changed the world book told a story, and everybody would join the Toyota approach and follow Toyota. And he realized that in the US was much harder than he expected. It wasn't so easy. The knowledge wasn't so obvious. It wasn't so easy. So he created LEI, and then I thought, great, that's what I wanted to do. Working in the academia didn't provide the opportunities to do that. That wasn't exactly what they wanted to do. And being a consultant also wasn't my thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to do something more in the educational, more in the translating those tools and techniques to spread this knowledge. So I felt very connected with this vision that Jim had for LEI. Then I created Lean Institute Brasil to spread this message, spread this knowledge to all companies in Brazil.
Yeah. And when you think back to the 90s, it's interesting to hear about, opening of markets, increased competition requires more competitiveness.
Yes.
And I imagine the spread of Lean in a number of ways was connected to Toyota's entry into the market. I know Toyota's been successful in Brazil for a long time. GM of Brazil had a really great reputation in the auto industry of probably making more, or it was said by many that, either there or Opel in Germany were making far more progress than GM North America.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of goes to show whether it was Toyota or GM or Honda or in the jungles or in the cities that I mean, I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about some of that, spread of Lean.
That's interesting
Brazil.
story. Yeah. That's interesting. You would be surprised to know that a Toyota plant in Brazil, in São Paulo, where I live, was the first Toyota plant outside Japan. Because at that time, again, a government policy was attracting investment. So that's when the investments came. At that time, we had no local auto industry. It was something that happened in the 50s. Again, government policy. So Toyota came with a very small, very old plant, and it stayed small and old for many decades. Yeah, including in the 90s. Only in the last couple decades that they decided to enhance that plant. Initially, they did a little bit of modernization, and gradually they took a very old product, and it was a rural vehicle, was a vehicle suited for the agriculture use.
Okay.
And Toyota never invested. Honda did a huge investment in the motorcycles, but nothing in the car business. It took them, like Toyota is very conservative, step by step. They were gradually investing in new, and Toyota was not an impactful brand until I would say 10 years ago, when it became clear that the quality, the reliability was far superior than the rest of the competition. So the Toyota impact was felt mostly in the last decade. But you're right, some of the transition from other companies was much more impactful. For example, I can quote two examples. GM in Brazil was far ahead of GM North America, and that's an interesting story how those big companies are. At that time, there was NUMMI already existing, and clearly a very successful story. GM and Toyota joint venture in California.
Right.
Some of the Brazilian leaders realized that it was a successful story, and they decided to send some of the Brazilian managers to spend some time at NUMMI, but without the knowledge and the authorization of the Detroit guys. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
So they were hiding to go to NUMMI, and then they came back and decided to take some of the initiatives. So they started the learning, creating what later was called the GM manufacturing system. They did that on their own. And then later on, as you mentioned, there was a new plant, a greenfield from GM in Europe, in Germany. And then after that first generation of lean plants, and that was supposed to be a purely, entirely lean plant. But again, Mark, now we can go back and understand from a lean plant on the technical side.
Right. Designing it.
Leadership, designing the approach and how the line and the undon'ts that they put in place that never worked the way they should work. But anyway, they did that in Germany, and then another generation of lean plants in their technical design came. And the second wave was in Argentina, a second lean plant in South America. And then a third wave of lean plants was a new plant in Brazil. So GM in Brazil was an outstanding case. The other interesting case, Mark, was Mercedes. Mercedes had a truck plant in Brazil, was a leading in the truck and buses market. And then they had an initiative. They hired a local director, a German guy, and he decided to hire a company to do Kaizen, the traditional 1 week Kaizen approach. He got some people from Toyota in Japan that had retired from Toyota, very well-known company that Jim quotes a lot in his books. They're still around, and they came with their 1 week Kaizen approach. They were able to transform a very successful transformation in a truck plant here in São Paulo again.
Nice.
That was very successful. That was independent of Germany. And we had our first event, our first real event. We did that inside that plant. So because lean was something totally new. People had no awareness of what was that. So we decided to have the event inside the facility. They had a very nice auditorium. We were glad that they were open. So they opened the auditorium and they opened the factory for visitors. So people saw there, and that was an eye-opening. People were shocked to see. Many people thought that was a fake, because how can you assemble a vehicle in an assembly line without any parts by the side of the line?
Yeah. Without a stockpile of parts to make up for the ones that were defective.
And piles of material, because there was a just-in-time system. There were parts coming from the suppliers. there was an engine, there was axles coming, aligning together and flowing in assembly line until the end of the line. They had never seen that before.
Yeah.
The traditional approach is you have a line that was in the middle of oceans of parts, components, of months of material sometimes.
Yeah.
So that was a shock for some people, and that started the interest. So surprisingly, wasn't Toyota that brought the awareness of Lean to Brazil. Only later that people really saw, wow, that's a different product, different quality, different reliability. So only now that Toyota created a reputation. But it took us an effort to convince people, because if you say Toyota system, they would say at that time, Toyota, what is that? They didn't know the company, they didn't know the brand.
Interesting. You're making me, I'm going to reminisce for a minute when we talk about companies focusing on the technical aspects of Lean. I started my career out of college at General Motors in 1995, an engine factory in Michigan. And the engine block machining line was, copied as, they weren't really using the word Lean, but in hindsight, it was a Lean design. And that the idea was there were instead of the old approach would have been stockpiling inventory between every machining center, because machines break down, tools break, and the idea was just build inventory buffers everywhere. They thought that was the key to throughput. So this new line would run in, one segment and curve back. Well, that was supposed to be the one approved buffer zone. Then it would curve back and then curve back again like an S. So you were supposed to have two buffer zones, but without the culture, without the support systems, machines broke down just as much, tools broke, management wouldn't let the frontline employees change the tools at the right intervals. They weren't allowed to do the quality work that was necessary. And it was a disaster, because now, it was creating safety problems, because management was telling people to pull parts off the line in places where it really wasn't physically designed to do so easily. And I mean, it emphasized for me, and until we got a second plant manager who I've talked about in other episodes, who was a NUMMI trained GM person, they started bringing in the culture and the support systems and the things that we in you and your book, I think, would call daily management. And that was really the thing that led to improvements in quality and productivity. It wasn't the design of the machining line itself. It was things like management.
Yeah, absolutely.
Social.
And understanding the role of management, especially the problem-solving approach. Every time you have a problem, in many of the GM plants, they put in place this undo system that you pull the cord, you stop the line, but the help wouldn't come.
Or they got yelled at, right?
Help wouldn't come. Because the emphasis on standardized work wasn't the same. They felt that Toyota had a too detailed orientation towards standardized work, so they wanted to have some more flexibility, so that somehow they saw a trade-off between standardization and flexibilization, so they gave up on standardization. The idea of help chain, the role of the managers, of the first tier supervisors, the team leaders, was completely different.
Yeah.
They saw the idea that Toyota had. I struggled with them with this for a long time. I really gave up. They were cost cutting. Their concern was cost cutting. I don't know if you remember the guy Lopez.
Oh, right.
Lopez, the guy, cost cutting. And they saw having one team leader for 6, 7 workers was a waste. They said, no, we want to eliminate layers.
And more workers.
Organization. So you need 50 people. You ask for help. Help will never come, because you cannot have help, one person supporting 50 people at once.
Right.
with no standards.
Right. That sounds like
So
hospitals, I hate to say.
hospitals,
I mean,
yes.
current day,
Yeah,
not 90s, but yeah,
yeah,
that doesn't
yeah,
work.
yeah,
That's not a good management system either. So,
yeah,
but I'm
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, it was fascinating to see that. So they made some progress on the technical part, on designing a technical system, conceptually a management system. But then the implementation, the execution of this, the leadership piece and the social piece wasn't there.
Right.
So after some time they just forget about it, forget about the pulling the cord and asking for help. Help will never come, and you would have the old system was keep the line moving, and at the end of the line, we'll fix it.
Yeah.
So they
Sort out
went
the good
back to
from the
this
bad.
approach, keep the line moving, unless it's something very critical, keep it moving, we'll fix later. So
Yeah.
the problems were never fixed, problem solving was too long, the quality of the problem solving wasn't the same because people involved in the work were not the people fixing the problem. So we went back to the old system, although there were some pieces, some technical pieces of Lean, but not the complete management and leadership system.
Yeah. So I think, you're painting a picture there, and maybe I did a little bit of, talking about the before situation, the current state, and some of the problems that answer the question, why lean management, why focus on the social systems, why daily management. But, Jose, I wanted to ask, first off, how do you define daily management? That's a term that I've heard used a lot more over the past decade. There's probably some variation in how people are describing that. So how do you define, kind of the key elements of daily management?
Yes, Mark, most companies, I would say most of them, have some kind of a daily management system, okay? Something. For example, the hospital you visited here in Brazil, which I am a patient. I
Mm-hmm.
often, not often go there. I mean, I go there
Yeah.
for me and for friends and for other people. So, I'm there, I'm taking care of a relative or a friend or myself, and I pay attention to what's going on. And they have been trying to implement Lean, and they have what they call those daily huddles. Okay? They have huddles. They have this name for a group of people teaming up in one area close to the operations, not in a meeting room, but close to the operation, sometimes with the help of some board, some information, and they talk about what's going on. They talk about the problems. Okay? You can call that daily management. That's how they manage every day. A surgical center, oncology center, whatever part of the hospital, the emergency room, the emergency area. Any area of a hospital. They use this term that's became kind of a popular in the healthcare world. They
Mm-hmm.
call this huddles.
Right.
And some other companies, for example, some software development in offices, we see often people saying stand-up meetings.
Yep.
Stand-up meetings, okay? So people stand up quick, short, to fix some emergency, to fix some problems. So we have something like that. But what we found at this process of managing what you have to achieve every day, we felt there was a need for improvement. So that's why we decided to write this book to fix some of those gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And I will mention some of the gaps. So that's the idea of a book, a more integrated
Mm-hmm.
approach to daily management. Yes, it has a meeting every day. Yes, it has a small group. Yes, standing up is good. Yes, having some visual boards can be helpful, but we need some more structure.
Yeah.
And I will mention that structure that we presented in the book.
Mm-hmm.
With the three blocks: that we suggest in the book. If I may, give you a little hint on that, Mark.
Yeah, please.
The first block is what we call the commitment. And the commitment means what is the strategy deployment to that area, to that particular area. So we're talking about areas, processes, pieces of a company. We're not talking about a huge, but the smaller pieces to start with. So we are looking at how is the strategy of the organization connects with that specific area, what that area has to deliver from a strategic perspective. So we call this commitment, meaning this is coming down from the corporation, what the strategic needs for the area and what the area is committing to achieve. And to start that discussion, we say you have to define the specific purpose of that area, not the purpose of the company. Why you exist? What value do you add? To whom? Because oftentimes you have those generic vision definitions, purpose definitions, but then it's different. In a hospital, for example, you have a pharmacy, has a different purpose. The purpose of the pharmacy is not the same as the radiology area or the surgical center. They have different purpose. They have different metrics. So we have to clarify, for example, a pharmacy in a hospital, what it has to deliver. Has to deliver some medication and some devices to the patients, to the surgical centers on time, with the right quality, without errors. You don't want to give a oncology treatment to somebody that has a problem in the leg.
Right.
So it has a different purpose, has a different commitment, has a different targets, has different metrics, has different KPIs. So this is the beginning. This block we call commitment. After we define that, what we have to deliver to our customers, to the company, then the second block is what we call control variables. That is, what are you really managing every day? And what, for example, in a pharmacy, how many deliveries you had? How often you deliver?
Right.
Do you have a route? Do you have a one piece by piece, or you have an emergency and then you have the routine? So what are you managing every day? What are you delivering every day? What kind of a metric are you using? And what is the target for that day? Okay.
Right.
In a pharmacy, in a hospital, you want zero error, for example.
Right.
Zero errors. And you may not have zero errors. You may have made some mistake. You send the wrong pill to the wrong place. That can be very damaging.
Right.
So we have to be concerned about that. So this is the second block, is what are you measuring every day? And Mark, the first block, my experience is very few companies do that. So
they just focus on all these measurements without starting.
All the measurements. So yes, all the measurements. Okay, the measurements are disconnected with the purpose. And the purpose is very important because we feel that the purpose is what drives people to work every day. Why do we exist? Why you have to work every day? What is your contribution? In this commitment block, we also put who are the people involved in this process and their contribution. Okay. So the second piece is what some companies do, not many, some companies do, is what metrics we have. Okay. So that's what we propose, but then we propose to link that with the first block and with the strategy. Because sometimes we measure the wrong things. Sometimes we don't measure what we need. And sometimes we measure things that are not needed.
Right.
In hospital, you have measures for everything. There are so many certifications, so many requirements. It's really very confusing to deal with that. So that's why they separate. And then the third block is very simple, Mark. Every time you have a red, on a day. Every time you have something bad, something wrong went. We're not having a good day today because something went wrong. So the idea is to have the third block is the problem-solving system.
Right.
Okay? So you have to address that problem. Eventually, you may have some sort of a contingency, some kind of a troubleshooting. It's not possible to, in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, to do any root cause analysis.
Right.
But at the same time, we suggest that you should start the causality analysis right on. So don't forget to register what we say, the points of causality, the points of occurrence.
Right.
So you create some sort of a problem-solving system. Maybe you can develop some kind of a quick problem-solving approach, or an A3, more systemic. So depending on the need. But what we see is that oftentimes, Mark, there is a disconnection between the problem-solving system and the daily management. So it's often you go to a company and say, well, we had this problem here. And they say, well, it happened last week. It happened last month. Yes, it did. So what's going on? Well, we gave this authorization, or we request the quality department, somebody from the quality department to fix it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. What's going on? Nobody knows. When it's going to be fixed? Nobody knows. Does this person know what's going on? Probably no. How long is this going to take? Forever. What's the quality of the solution? We don't know. So we propose to make the problem-solving process visible, close to the Gemba, close to the area, close to this, in this board, and it has to be connected with the REDs. You shouldn't have a problem solving without a specific RED. So you connect that, every time you have a RED, what is the plan to green? How you become green?
How do you close that gap? Yeah.
How are you going to close that gap? It has to be visible. You cannot outsource this to another department, to another area, or to somebody somewhere in an office. Has to be there, has to be visible. So everybody should be able to know this is happening. So those are the fundamental blocks. One is connected with the strategy and provides the commitment and the people involved. The second block is the controls. What are you measuring and controlling every day? In this block, Mark, we suggest two things that are fundamental. One is what are the basic standards, and have it visually. What are the basic standards? And the second part is what is the help chain? Make it visible. For that type of problem, this is what you have to do. Because we don't want to have daily management as the only place to actually discuss problems. Because you have to do that before. You have to start fixing it as soon as it happens.
Right.
And if you cannot fix it, call for help. If help doesn't come, or help comes but not able to fix it, then it goes to this daily routine, daily board.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the last piece, Mark, that I want to tell you, we have two levels of daily management. One is at the operational level. Okay. So in a hospital, you have all those areas that we talked about. But at the same time, the hospital director should be able to know, are we having a good day today? But this is a different level. This is a more systemic approach. Maybe the indicators, the metrics are not the same. Oftentimes they are not the same. But the director should be able to know what are the big problems that we are facing today, and what's happening with them on a daily basis. The management team should be able to do that.
Yeah.
So that's why we separate. The operational is more closer to the value-adding processes. And then the managerial level is more connected with the management and the leadership layers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like the way you break that down and talk about the need for an integrated system. And, I agree with you. We have these huddles, they're short. You can identify problems, you can be collecting some data on causes, you can be doing your Pareto chart, but then there's got to be time for improvement work outside of those huddles. And that's, I think, one of the most common problems I've seen in US hospitals is that they do the quick huddles, but then they don't have a way of providing time for people to actually then work on improvement work or root cause analysis outside of those huddles. So they end up talking about the same problems over and over again. And that gets really discouraging.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So those are good mechanisms. Those daily huddles, they're good for people to communicate. It's basically a communication tool.
Right. A check-in.
So everybody is on the same page on what's happening. But then it's not a problem-solving approach. It's not a problem-solving mechanism. So they separate the problem-solving approach to this. And for example, in some of the hospitals, I still see signs of a Six Sigma around. And so they delegate those problems to people that are far from the operation,
right,
far from the reality, and they are data oriented. They understand the numbers, but they don't understand they don't know the facts and what causes those numbers.
Yeah.
So oftentimes it's very time consuming. It takes a long time, and oftentimes the solution is not the optimal, the best solution. Sometimes it's too complicated because they are far from the Gemba.
Yeah.
So we need to have. And the more people are involved in these problem-solving activities, and I call problem-solving because most of the times when you problem-solve, you're going to improve.
Sure.
So we're not improving. It's the art book about types of problems.
Four types of problems. Yeah.
We're talking mostly about type 2 and type 1. We're not talking about Kaizen. We're not talking about type 3. We are basically talking about type 1 every time, everywhere. And type 2 is exactly because you have a standard, you have a target for the day. And you should know that you have a gap according to this.
Yeah.
So this type 2 problem is the type that mostly you're going to have in those daily management activities.
Yeah. So we can point people to Art Smalley's book, The Four Types of Problems. It was also from LEI. Jose, one other thing I want to talk about here, maybe a final topic. One thing that jumped out at me when I was first going through the book, and again, the title is Daily Management to Execute Strategy, was that the focus is not just on these boards, which could be in a way a technical development, bulletin boards, whiteboards, that's a technology. But the way you emphasized and called out very specifically and in some depth a topic that's important to me, psychological safety, which is now getting into the social side of things. So I'd love to hear your thoughts around just how psychological safety is foundational and how you think through that phrase and that concept.
We in the book we have a kind of a first chapter introducing the concept, the idea that you need to fix the problems as soon as possible to avoid things being too late. You know how bad we were at the end of the year, now at the end of the shift, not at the end of the day. So we have that discussion. The second part of the book is a more technical, how you design a daily management process according to this framework that was suggested. And then the third part is, you have a beautiful strategy deployment, purpose definition, you know what to measure every day, and you measure every day. But then the life of this is the engagement of the people. So we suggest that this daily management process, it's a school, it's an educational process. So every day people for a half an hour are talking about their work and the problems they're facing and what can be done. And they should be coming up with the ideas, with the solutions every day. So this is not an isolated thing that you take people off the line and have a Kaizen experience. This is every day. Talk about what happened yesterday, what happened today. So we think this is very powerful as an educational, as a development perspective, because you can take people to the classroom, you can take people to a dojo, you can take people to an office to fix a problem with a flip chart. Okay, that's needed. Oftentimes that's also needed. But then the idea of every day for 15 minutes, half an hour, you have people solving problems and learning. So that's why psychological safety is fundamental. If you don't have a high level of psychological safety, you don't create this learning environment. You have to eliminate fear. This goes back to Dr. Deming, one of the principles. You have to eliminate fear.
Right.
It should be okay to talk about problems.
Yes.
It should be okay to give suggestions that might not be the best because you don't have all the knowledge, all the capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So the role of the leadership is to engage people and to ask the contribution of the people. They should be able to know with this approach, their daily work, not only this 15 minutes, their work is going to be more meaningful to them. Mm-hmm. They will know. So they are going to be, if they have a machine, they should know how the machine operates. So the alienation process is much less. People are doing the work and they understand what they're doing. They understand the meaning of that. They understand the contribution of that, and they learn every day. So to create this learning process, leadership has to provide this psychological safe environment. Right. It's okay to tell what you think. It's okay to expose problems.
Yes.
Not only okay, but that's what we want. We want.
Yeah.
And we don't have the answers. We don't expect the leader to have all the answers. The answers should come from us. We should try it. We should try it.
Yeah.
So that's why the social piece, the leadership piece, and the psychologically safe environment is fundamental to the success of a daily management process.
Yeah. And I love how it was stated in the book that psychological safety means all employees feel comfortable engaging in problem solving, learning, experimentation, and improvement. And that means, I think, comfortable speaking up. Now, being challenged is, I think, a key part of the Toyota production system. So I think, sometimes people misunderstand psychological safety as meaning like, well, we're never being challenged. We feel
good,
comfortable all the time, as opposed to comfortable speaking up.
Yeah. I think that's a confusion that I see often, Mark. Psychological safety doesn't mean having everybody in the comfort zone feeling good. Yeah. It's just the opposite.
Right.
With this approach, you're going to have a very low performance.
Yeah.
Very low performance. To go to a high performance learning organization, you need psychological safety, but a challenging. Leadership has to challenge. And where's the challenge comes from, Mark? The red. Yeah. There's a red right there.
The red or...
There's a commitment right there in front of everybody. We told the organization we're going to do this. We're going to deliver this, and we're not doing it. What are we going to do about it? Mm-hmm. So that creates the challenging environment to really have learning and development and improvement as a foundation for daily work.
Yeah.
So improvement is not something you fix, you do afterwards or separated. It's part of your work every day, fixing the problems every day. Yeah. Making sure the reds are dealt with and they become green as soon as possible.
Yeah. Well, Jose, thank you for your time today and for telling some of your story, telling some of Brazil's Lean story, and for talking about the book. So again, our guest, Jose Ferro, the book is Daily Management to Execute Strategy Solving Problems and Developing People Every Day, written by Jose and co-author, I hope I'm going to say the last name correctly, Robson Gouveia.
Perfect. Very good
Okay.
Portuguese.
So congratulations to you and to Robson, and thanks to everybody who helped bring this to us here in the U.S. in English through LEI. So this has been great. Maybe we can. There's so much we could dig into. It would be great to have you back on the podcast again someday.
Yes, we will be delighted. The best way to talk about this is to provide some real examples. Maybe next time we'll bring some examples of people trying this framework and seeing what have been the benefits. We'll be delighted to do that.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks again. Thanks so much, Jose.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.